Hi everyone, welcome to Off the Podium. I have a fellow flutist, Ali Ryerson, on the podcast with me. Ali, welcome to Off the Podium.
Oh, thank you so much, Tigran. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you.
I've mentioned it a few times, but I've done about 50 of these, and I rarely talk about it. But I'm a former flutist. I don't play much anymore, but it's great to have a flutist on, especially a flutist who is in a genre that most flutists aren't in. So you don't grow up playing jazz flute or any other genre than classical, because that's just how the world works. Did you grow up wanting to play the flute, and especially play a genre that most people don't often want to play, or maybe are just not familiar with?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm so happy to find out that you are, or at least have been, a flutist in your life, because I always love talking with fellow flutists. Well, I grew up in a musical family. My father, Art Ryerson, was a jazz guitarist, and he got his start during the big band era
Uh-huh.
of the late 30s. And he was actually with Paul Whiteman, the Paul Whiteman Orchestra, for several years and toured with them, recorded with them, even arranged for them.
Uh-huh.
And I have three older brothers, and everybody is a musician.
Uh-huh.
Two I worked with when I was growing up, and we had a family band. My father used to write the arrangements and everything. So when I was five, we all started on the piano, my brothers and I. And then when I was eight, I chose a second instrument, and well, two of my brothers were playing the trumpet as well as the piano. And so at first I wanted to play the trumpet, but my mother was not in favor of it. She actually said to me, and I didn't understand it at the time, but she said, "No, you have to save your lips for something else." And maybe that's just the way I remember it. but but I studied classically. And when I was young, when I was actually 16, I was studying in New York City with Harold Bennett, who was the principal with the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra and one of the top teachers in town as well.
Uh-huh.
Um, but because I was growing up in basically a jazz family, all I heard around the house was jazz improvisation. And my oldest brother Art was both a great trombone player and a pianist, and he was in love with Bill Evans. So of course I'm hearing his transcriptions of Bill Evans solos, and on my brother Rich and John, both trumpet players at the time, and so they had a huge record collection of Miles Davis, Art Farmer, Chet Baker, Freddie Hubbard, um, and I was starting to, also hear from my brother's record player, like Don Sebesky, and so I really got this simultaneous exposure to jazz when I was very young, and even by the time I was 11, I was already improvising because it was just the thing to do in my household. And then when I was 15, my brothers would start bringing me on their gigs. And when I was in high school, during like study hour, I would go to a practice room and jam with a piano player or a drummer or whatever. And so improvisation came very naturally to me because of my environment growing up. And but as I said, I was trained classically, and in my career, I have been actually I was principal flutist for a season, but before I think I either moved or the orchestra disbanded. But it was out in Monterey, California,
Uh-huh.
and I've subbed for back east in the Hartford Symphony and stuff like that, and have played over the years a whole lot of chamber music, and I still perform, at the NFA, National Flute Association, our annual conventions.
Hmm.
I perform both jazz and classical,
Yeah.
and I'm a composer at this point, and a lot of what I write is maybe jazz inspired but thoroughly composed. So yeah, so I'm very grateful for the fact that my dad was he became a top studio musician in New York and recorded with everybody from Louis Armstrong to Charlie Parker to Errol Garner, Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley,
Uh-huh.
Bill Haley and the Comets. Um, um, and But because of his professional connections, that's why I was able to start studying with Harold Bennett and et cetera, et cetera. So I was very fortunate to have a very solid classical training, but at the same time, the opportunity to learn how to improvise, basically thanks to my brothers.
Yeah.
And and then it all kind of went on from there.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I and I do agree with you. It's by no means the normal route for a flute player.
Yeah.
Um, either usually there are a greater number of jazz flutists who are doublers, who are start out basically as saxophone players
Yeah.
and pick up the flute because in a big band, they're required to play a tune or two on the flute, but their technique is not usually up to par in terms of a classical flutist standards.
Yeah.
But that's how I got lucky. Started out as a real flute player, and have been saturated my whole life with jazz.
Yeah.
So immersed in the jazz world. I always Tigran, I always call it the perfect storm.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I was gonna say about the doubling because I know a lot of sax players double. Did you ever double on sax or any other instrument?
In fact, when I was I've been on the road for too many years. Since it's actually like, is it 45 years, something like that, or 44 years? But it was sometime, I think, in the late 80s, or maybe it was the early 90s. But I started thinking, let me try a little alto sax.
Uh-huh.
So I actually like borrowed one or rented one from a buddy who owns a music store in Danbury. Russ Muma owns the Music Hills, and I took it with me on the road. I was actually working on tour in Europe. I remember practicing in the room in Barcelona, and and that's where I learned that I am not a saxophone player. It's just not my thing.
Yeah.
And so that was a very short-lived. I won't even say it was a dream because I was doing it kind of for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was sort of like, maybe I should do this.
Yeah.
But no, I fell in love. I knew I was going to be a flute player in for my life when I was 11 years old.
Mhm.
I mean, it just I chose the flute, and it was kind of a love affair,
Yeah.
right from the start. So yeah, that's it.
A me- maybe a memorable performance, something that comes to mind. Maybe you were young and you weren't expecting a certain call or a certain performance at a festival. A memorable performance that comes to mind. The first one that comes to mind, maybe.
Okay, so the first one, that's a great question. Nobody has ever asked me that. Good for you. So the first one that comes to mind was absolutely with Stephane Grappelli, the great Belgian jazz violinist who had was with Django Reinhardt for many years with the Hot Club of France.
Hmm.
But Stephane, I had worked with, toured with several times in Europe, and so when Carnegie Hall was having, I think it was their centennial celebration year or something like that, I got a call to perform as guest artist with Stephane Grappelli at
Wow.
Carnegie Hall,
Wow.
and that was just amazing to me. And
Wow.
I remember the day like it was yesterday. It was one of those things where I knew how special it was, and so I was very aware of every moment um, of the day,
Mm.
and in my life, I've actually over the years, many years ago, I lived in New York City, and twice I lived on 57th Street, which is
Mm.
of course where Carnegie Hall is,
Yeah.
and for a time in the very early 80s, I lived on East 57th Street, and then later on in the late 80s, I lived on West 57th Street, and a million years ago, I got married a couple doors down from Carnegie Hall at the Meridian Hotel,
Wow.
and I used to have. I got married there because I had a steady gig there.
Huh.
So, but anyway, that's all history, including the marriage.
A life-changing moment, whether it's personal or professional, a moment where things just shifted for better or worse, maybe. But better or worse, it doesn't matter because somehow just influences and inspires our life to go in a different direction. So maybe a life-changing moment.
Wow, wow. Another great question. Let's see. Um, I'm going to actually answer, if it's okay, with two different ones.
Sure. Yeah.
So one of them, I had my recording career started in Europe, and I actually recorded, I think it was maybe 4 albums in Europe,
Mhm.
um, and and I had not, except for um, like commercial recordings, in other words, jingles and things like that.
Mhm.
Just recording dates, not albums.
Yeah.
Um, that I had done in New York for a while, but and this kind of ties into the Carnegie Hall performance. The legendary record producer Bob Thiel,
Mhm.
who produced, I think it was My Favorite Things of Coltrane, and
Yeah.
he did, Charlie Parker and with strings and so much more. But Bob Thiel
Yeah.
was at the rehearsal at Carnegie Hall because he wanted to talk to Grappelli about his new label,
Mhm.
which was called Red Baron.
Mhm.
Turned out to be his final label because he had the Flying Dutchman and Impulse records. Anyway, um, so he wanted to ask Grappelli if he would be able to stay over a few days and record for um, for the new label. And as it turned out, he was not able to stay over, so he couldn't accept that invitation. But then Bob Thiel asked Grappelli, "So who's the flute player?"
Mhm. Yeah.
So when Bob Thiel found out that it was me, he put two and two together because he had used my father on many recording dates in the
Uh-huh.
past. So he called my father and he said, I just heard your daughter at rehearsal at Carnegie, and I want to sign her to my new label."
Mm.
And so anyway, um, the rest is history.
Wow. Wow.
My dad got Bob in touch with me, and so then I had my first recording contract in the States, and the first recording was with Kenny Barron, Red Rodney, Santi Dubriano, and Roy Haynes. So it was a pretty good band.
Wow.
So that goes way back to the late 80s, I believe. And that first one was called Blue Flute, and then I did a second one for Bob, which was I'll Be Back.
Uh-huh.
And then I ended up getting a call from Carl Jefferson with Concord Records, and so that was the next thing. I did 3 albums on Concord, which were amazing, and I loved the Concord label. That has completely changed.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, Carl died, Jeff died,
Yeah.
but anyway, but so Carnegie Hall turned out to be a life changing moment as well.
Wow.
Now the other thing that actually happened, and it's kind of funny when I think about it as a life changing moment. I got a message. I guess it was an email or maybe it was on Facebook from a flute player who at the time I did not know personally. Now he's a dear friend, but an American low flute specialist, Peter Sheridan.
Uh-huh.
And Peter, Peter lives in Australia. He teaches there. He comes to the States frequently, usually, at least we all say hopefully every year. But he's originally from New York, and I know he also lived on the West Coast for a number of years. But he is one of the great low flute specialists in the world, and not only alto but bass and contrabass and below that hyper bass. A lot of things only flute players know about. Anyway, in this message from Peter, he asked me if I would he would like to commission me to write a piece for I guess it was maybe a quartet. Now I'm forgetting if it was a trio or a quartet.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I had done a little bit of writing, but most of it was were more like arrangements. I had written maybe the year before for Chris Potter, another great flutist,
mm-hmm.
Who lives out in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah.
And for 2013 down in New Orleans, we had a big flute convention, and so she asked me to arrange some pieces for a low flute ensemble, and so I took some Dixieland tunes and did an arrangement. But
mm-hmm.
I thought of that as fun, but nothing serious.
Yeah.
And then Peter asked me to compose something, and I was so taken aback because I'm thinking, why? Because I'm not known as a composer.
Yeah.
And then what I realized, and it really was a life-changing moment that kind of has unfolded over the next like 5 years. I guess what he saw, because I believe heard those arrangements, but it had more to do with my jazz improvisation, and so he understood the concept of what the process of improvisation must be in terms of the way that we kind of define it as composition in the moment, spontaneous composition, as it were. And so, in other words, the creative side of my playing spoke to him, and so it just kind of allowed him to trust me and to be able to commission me to write something.
Yeah.
In other words, like, if you can play like that, I believe that you can write like that.
Yeah.
And that and the reason why I bring all of this up is because it really did change my life, because I know for years I kind of I so respect composers, but I kind of envied that belief that you could actually write something that's of any value, considering how much good music already exists.
Yeah.
And the fact that like in the jazz world, it's like everybody and his brother thinks they're a good composer, but very often, the new tunes are nothing that really sticks because they're nice, but they're not great.
Yeah.
And jazz standards become jazz standards, and we play them all the time because they're great.
Yeah.
And I never put myself in that category. And not that I do now, but I never thought myself capable of doing that.
Yeah.
And when Peter commissioned me to do that, it allowed me to have a little bit of trust in myself that maybe I can do this. And I spent a few months working on it. And since then, I have been asked whether it's, an actual commission or a request, or I'm inspired and I just write because I want to.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, here I am with something of a body of work. I mean, that's such a pretentious phrase, but it kind of sums up the way I feel in terms of that commission, from that request from Peter Sheridan, was a life-changing moment.
Wow.
Because this is like a whole other um, part of my life now, writing.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. So adding that to the mix of being a player and of course teaching and everything I do with my beloved Gemeinhardt flute family.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, there's nothing like composing. And then because of the National Flute Association, the NFA, because most of what I write at this point is for flute players.
Yeah.
And so absolutely everything that I write and end up publishing and things sell, and so I have flute players and flute choirs all over the country playing my stuff. And so whatever I write gets played.
And all over the world.
All over the world.
Because I remember listening to a recording that was, I don't think it's a commercially released recording, but I saw one of your concerts in Japan, and it was great to see that too.
Oh, yes. Oh, I'm so glad you saw that. Yeah, that's the Japan Jazz Flute Big Band. Oh, I'm so glad you saw that. Yeah, that's with my dear friends Yuko Hoshi and her husband Kenji Kono, and they created that, and she had heard me many years ago, and kind of followed my career.
Yeah.
And then I met her because she came to one of my master classes in California. And that's also thanks to Keith Underwood, who's a dear friend, and he's an incredible flute player, classical and everything.
Of course.
Brazilian, just everything.
Yeah.
And so he had been friends with Yuko for years, and she had taken master classes with Keith, and so that's how that introduction was made. And so anyway, then Yuko heard my jazz flute big band at my master class, and she had written some arrangements, so we all got together, all the classical players and all the jazz players, and we did some of Yuko's arrangements, and a very lasting friendship was born. And then last year, just about a year ago, she invited me to come over to Tokyo and perform with her big band.
Yeah.
It was fabulous.
Yeah.
They're all coming back to the States in April, and we're going to be playing at the first International Low Flute Festival, which is the first weekend in April in Reston, Virginia.
Wow.
Yeah, and then we're heading up to New York, so
amazing.
Great.
Growing up, I was always fascinated by non-classical flute players, and I remember going out and getting the Hubert Laws, Herbie Mann, Dave Valentine, a bunch of recordings, and I eventually came across your name. You're a little bit younger than some of those players, but I did see that there was some kind of a link to Hubert Laws. Did you study with him? Did you play with him? What was the experience like? Some stories, maybe.
Oh, yes. So no, I never studied with Hubert. The first connection that we had was in fact, when I did the recording for Tom Burns of Capri Records
Mm-hmm.
back in, well, we recorded in 2012 and in New York and at the old Avatar Studios, one of great studios. It's been transformed into something else, I think now. But anyway, so it was my jazz flute big band, and so I decided to ask three special guests who would not be the core band, because I had like 16 flute players plus rhythm section, fabulous rhythm section. And so my three guests were Holly Hoffman, dear friend, my buddy Holly, and Nestor Torres and Hubert.
Oh wow. Wow.
Yeah, so they were the special guests, guest soloists on the album.
Wow.
And then it was released the summer of 2013, just in time for the NFA Flute Convention in New Orleans.
Yeah.
That same one I was speaking of earlier.
Yeah.
And so Hubert was invited to perform. Well, I invited him to perform with the Jazz Flute Big Band, which played. We played two concerts at the convention: the opening night gala, and then the Saturday night, the late night cabaret concert. And we were on a panel together, and so it was. And actually, the opening concert, I was the kind of like the opening act, and then Maraca, fabulous. Maraca was on that program, and then Hubert, and then the Jazz Flute Big Band closed the whole concert. So I never studied with Hubert, but we've had that opportunity to actually work together.
Wow.
And of course, growing up like all jazz flute players of our generation, we got his albums.
Yeah. And I was gonna, since you spoke about the younger generation of flute players, I want to talk about even further down, the younger generation than you. I want to know what your thoughts are about what's going on with jazz flute. Maybe some younger generation flute players that you've seen and you really liked what they're doing. You could say some names, or you could just talk about generally what you've seen and if there is a future for jazz flute.
Oh, right. And I'm hoping I'm going to remember the names that I'm thinking of. Well, the very fortunate thing that has happened to me is that I guess it's because of my exposure, whether it's on the radio or the internet or Facebook or whatever. And also all the teaching I do, because I teach worldwide, and with the NFA, I'm in contact with so many young flute players and aspiring jazz flutists, and because of social media, they're also able to get in touch with me.
Yeah.
And so I have heard some amazing flute players. I'm trying to think of this one of the gals, Elena Pinderhughes, I think that is her name.
Okay.
And I think that she recorded with Kenny Barron, and I recorded with Kenny twice, but I think she was studying probably at Manhattan or something like that, and at this, and Kenny was teaching there, and so I think that being a student, I mean, that's always to my mind, that's one of the big reasons why kids should go to school. Although that's not where I got any of my breaks. I just went on the road when I was 20, and that's what happened. So I went back to school later, but all of my breaks happened in kind of in real life,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
school.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think these days it's a way of I don't want to put it coldly like networking because it's a learning situation,
Of course.
but that's where you do end up meeting some of your idols and everything,
Of
and
course.
having the opportunity to play with them.
Yeah. Of course.
So this is one gal, and Sarpai. I always forget how to pronounce the rest of his name, but
Uh-huh.
he's another big talent. Um, I have I have a very different approach from a lot of the young players.
Uh-huh.
I'm not gonna call it old school, although I just did. But I approach music in a much more lyrical way, as opposed to let me learn, an entire set of patterns, and I'm going to apply it to every tune I know.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I still like melody,
Yeah.
and it's going to be a melody that I'm making up.
Yeah.
But that's over the years, when you get to be my age, I think it's important to know what your tastes really are musically, and not feel that well, I should be doing that, or I should be doing that. I always did that with my material. I played the tunes I wanted to, as opposed the tunes that spoke to me, the tunes that melodically I fell in love with them, and I still play them today.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. Obviously, there's too many tunes to, you can recycle things, and I add new material all the time. The Brazilian repertoire just blows my mind, and contemporary composers have come into my life throughout my career, and so I feel very strongly about, for one thing, choosing material, choosing the way you play according to yourself, because I think everything else is going to turn out to be a carbon copy of something,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think that's the point.
Yeah.
And so it's so anyway, I kind of got sidetracked.
No, I loved it. This is great.
Oh, thank you. But what I feel is there's an enormous amount of talent. I think what I find is the human body, through the generations, as we go through generations, becomes, it just as technology advances, I think the human body evolves, and I think younger kids, younger players, the kids are perhaps physically more capable of pyrotechnics. It's just my point is that I'm not always sure that's the best way to go. Just as all of this technology we have today, is that making our life better or not?
Yeah.
So there's a definite analogy there.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because I am at this point of more on the older generation side than the new.
Well, I was gonna say advice to young musicians, but you pretty much just said everything. So I love that you answered that. So it's great. I really like it. There's a section for this podcast where it's sort of relatively new, where I ask some blitz questions, and you can either answer them funny or serious, or not answer them if you can't find an answer. But some of them are my questions, some of them are by French TV personality host Bernard Pivot. So here they are. What is your favorite word?
Oh, that's a good one. Music.
What is your least favorite word?
Depression.
What food goes well with jazz flute?
I love it. What food goes well with jazz flute? Oh my gosh. Let's see. Cheesecake.
That's great. I love it. I love cheesecake too. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Oh wow. Being outside. You know, whether it's a walk, a run on the lake, a swim,
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
being outside.
What turns you off?
Having to be at my computer too long.
Yeah. But with that said, you are absolutely fantastic at doing that because you've been so great about, of course, responding to my messages and
Oh,
and setting this up.
thank
Even
you.
though I must apologize before we get to the next question, it's been kind of tough putting this together because you had a very busy summer touring all over the place, and I was also busy, so it was tough. I wish we got this earlier, but I'm very happy that we finally found time.
Oh, thank you, Tigran. I feel exactly the same way. I really do.
What sound or noise do you love?
Oh, I love the flute.
And the opposite of what I just asked, maybe a sound that you don't like.
Oh, this is an awful thing. I hate even saying it, but the sound of a car crash
Yeah, and what?
freaks me out.
Yeah, yeah. That's always
Yeah,
terrifying and scary. What
yeah.
profession other than doing what you do now would you like to do other than what you do now?
Oh, I would love to be in the theater. I'd love to act.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
What's
yeah.
your favorite movie?
Oh my gosh. I love that question. Well, I'm gonna say two.
Okay, go for it.
They're kind of opposite. And probably, and you might only know of one. I love A Wonderful Life
Mm-hmm.
with Jimmy Stewart. You know, it's just one of those heartwarming gems.
Mm-hmm.
But the other movie that has the most touching love story um, to me, and a lot of people don't even know the movie. It's with Simone Signoret. It's Ship of Fools,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a story. And Oscar Werner, and he's a doctor, and she's actually a prisoner,
Mm-hmm.
and she's they're on a ship, and they're going to Germany to a Bremerhaven or something, but she is being let off early to go to prison, and you never know the story of why, but they end up falling in love on the ship, and it's just the most beautiful love story, and I have always thought of that movie as certainly among my most favorite movies.
Yeah.
Ship of Fools.
Well, the last part of this is the some of the questions that you got both on your page and also some people that contacted me and asked questions. There's about 5 of them, so here we are with Ken Verms. The song piece has a very difficult form. How does Ali approach unusual harmonic structures and establish solo ideas?
Wow, wow. And please thank Ken for the question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ken, for this question. Yes. So piece is a 10 bar form. Number one, when you're learning tunes, knowing the form
Uh-huh.
is the first step.
Yeah.
And so the way that I approach it is where it moves, where the tonal centers
Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
and that's the beauty of that tune.
Uh-huh.
And the kind of the two different things that I do is both um, harmonically having a real sense of where the tune is modulating, and of
Mhm.
course, piece is has several surprises in it,
Yeah.
as many surprises as you can have in 10 bars, and then because, as I mentioned before, my lyrical bent in playing, um, I approach everything in terms of like voice leading, and so the way that I approach harmony is melodically.
Uh-huh.
if
Yeah.
if if that makes if
Yeah.
that makes
Yeah,
sense.
of course.
So in other words, it's like the way I always, when I'm teaching in terms of how do you approach chord progressions, one of the things I talk about in terms of voice leading is okay, what are the common tones, and what are the notes that move by a half a step?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And so that's how just putting it into words, how I kind of approach it. But what I do, I mean, in real life, when I'm working on a tune, I mean, if I'm going to practice that tune at home, and I might do that today. Thank you, Ken. What practicing as a jazz player is all about is assimilating the changes, so that you are no longer thinking changes. Because when you're still thinking, you don't know the tune well enough to let go of that and just hear. Because that's what you need to do. But that's what the practice is all about. So being able to hear, like, oh my God, I'm going to that note or that run or whatever it is, or that intervallic leap, or combination of notes.
Yeah, of course.
But it frees you up once you really have digested orally the changes, so that it becomes, and it's completely intermingled with the melody. So it's all one in a way, and then you're not thinking about it anymore, and you can play. But it doesn't happen overnight. There are steps, and what I spoke of just before, I think, are the beginning steps to understanding how to get there, how to get free enough to be able to just hear and play.
Perfect. Next question. Carl Klein says, what inspires the ever fresh performances of some classic jazz genres? Or jazz tunes, maybe.
Well, I mean, so in other words, when you're playing Stella by Starlight and you've played it, I don't know how many times in your life, maybe hundreds of times in your life, how can you still come up with something that's fresh?
Exactly.
And for one thing, this relates back to what I said earlier when we were talking about composing. These tunes have become standards because they're great. And there's something about them, I mean, music is music. We're not supposed to be able to put everything into words when we're explaining it. Otherwise we wouldn't need music. But there's something emotional that happens. Certainly when I'm playing a tune, and especially when I know it so well. That's the freedom. Maybe that's it. It's like the freedom that you feel when you know something so intimately, and you don't have to think anymore. You can just hear. And then you're playing with a band. I mean, I have fun practicing at home alone too. But the whole thing that happens in a performance where it turns into a conversation, and you're having a fresh conversation on an old familiar topic, and with great friends, whether you know them or not. And so I believe that's what it is. This great material, these great tunes, become like old friends to us, and it's just like an old friend, a real person. And you see them, and it's like every single time you see them, you're going to have a great conversation. You know that person. You might have even you talked about the same thing. But it's always fun. It's always inspiring. So that's my answer. Great. Good answer.
Great. That was from Carl Klein. This next one is from Betsy Broad, and she said, and I think you saw this, but she said, ask her who her favorite standmate is.
I'm so glad you saw that question. It's Betsy.
Okay, good.
And she's been my favorite standmate ever since. Is it New Orleans? Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where she's from, and she's a dear friend, and I love playing with her, and also actually it wasn't New Orleans where we were standmates. That I think might have been out in L.A. or something, but yes, it's absolutely Betsy, the jazz nurse, we call her.
Two more questions from your fans. Mark Haskins says favorite flutist regardless of genre.
Oh, well, that's Julius Baker. Julie Baker. Yeah.
One more. Amber Cole says, do you play any other instruments? And I think you answered this to a certain extent, but I like to get all the questions that the people have asked. So do you play any other instruments?
Yes, I play piano. When I was younger, I was actually a pretty good classical player. Now I use the piano much more for writing.
Yeah.
And my dream is someday to have time to get back, and I mean every so often I'll pull something out and have fun trying to play through it, but I adore the piano. I mean, it's such an incredible instrument. And when I was younger, I do not play anymore, but when I was younger, probably because of my father, I did play some guitar.
Wow.
But I have one of my father's 7-string guitars. Wow. He was one of the first. Yeah. Wow. But anyway, but I don't ask me to play guitar because I won't, and I can't.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Do we miss anything that you want to get to?
Oh my gosh!
There's always a lot to talk about.
There's always a lot to talk about. Naturally, thank goodness for Facebook, even though it drives us all crazy too. Yeah. But at least it does allow us to be connected, and so this isn't the time or place to share individual gigs or anything like that. That's not what this is about at all.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the only thing which I had just mentioned briefly, my wonderful Gemeinhardt flute family. Mm-hmm. They really are like my family, and thanks to them, I have I helped develop the Ali Ryerson model.
Oh, I did see that. Yeah.
C flute and alto flute. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I have an autograph series of flutes.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And my C flute now has the James Galway Crusader head joint on it. And I'm friends. I mean, this is like, I get goosebumps when I even say this, but I'm actually friends with Sir James and Lady Jeannie Galway.
Wow.
And I performed at the Galway Festival in Switzerland over the summer, and that was amazing.
Yeah.
When James Galway is sitting there next to Lady Jeannie, and you're playing a concert, and they're like right up front.
Yeah.
And things like that in life, they're amazing gifts that have happened to me, and I'm forever grateful and very aware. And actually, we can end our lovely talk with the advice that my father gave me many years ago, and every day of my life when he was still with us. And it was, and don't forget to practice.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ali. It's been an absolute pleasure. I I hope to have you back at some point. Just let me know, and hopefully we'll get you back on, because there's so much to talk about. We could get in depth and talk about so many other things, and I loved everything you said, and hopefully we'll chat more in the future.
Oh, thank you so much, Tigran. I can really honestly say this has been one of the most delightful interviews. Some of the greatest questions. Really,
Well, thank
really
you so
enjoyed
much.
it. Thank you for persisting.
Thank you so much. Really means a lot to me. Thank you.
Oh, well, you're an angel. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Have a beautiful day. Thank you so much.